Okay.
All right, I will do my intro again. Thank you everyone for joining. This is the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Grant Eligibility and Support Committee meeting. I'm Jason Galkin, the chair of the committee. I'm going to go ahead and ask Shannon to do pre-meeting housekeeping reminders, and we'll have roll call.
And Jason, your sound was a little bit low, but I'm not sure if it's just my computer, but
could be me and my microphone.
oh, there, that sounded better. That was better.
We'll get closer to the microphone.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Grant Eligibility and Support Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raised hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference. Per Bagley-Keene requirements, all cameras must be kept on for the duration of the meeting. If you are unable to have your camera on, you must indicate a reason for your non-appearance during the meeting. Please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select enable auto transcription. Thank you.
Oh, Jason, sorry, I think your volume, I don't think we're able to.
Can you hear me? I'm going to try to speak up. Oh no.
It's still pretty low, Jason. I think when you leaned in earlier, it helped, but it's still pretty low for me at least.
All right, how about now?
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to speak up real loud and just shout into the microphone because that seems to be what I have to do. Otherwise, I'll be eating the microphone, and I'd rather you not all be looking at my nose. So we'll do it that way. Crystal, do you want to call roll?
Yes, I will go ahead and get that started. Gonzalez.
Here.
King.
Here.
Judge Klein.
Here.
Milrod.
Present.
Pryor.
Here.
Stalker.
Here.
And then Galkin.
Here.
All right, calling our advisors, Justice Rodriguez.
Here.
All right, Judge Juan Gutierrez.
Here.
Wonderful. Our liaisons, I see Selena on the call. Is Melanie on the call as well?
I am here.
Okay, wonderful. And then State Bar staff will just make a note as well. We have 6 members present. We have quorum.
Yoon Kim is also present.
Oh, you can. Okay, thank you.
Public comment section. Do we have anyone looking to make public comment? I'll do the intro. So.
There is no one with their hands raised.
Okay, well, if there is later, we can do a note about public comment. So if someone does raise their hand at this point in time, now would be the time for public comment. Public comments should be tailored towards the subject matter jurisdiction of our committee. And we would limit the time to 3 minutes. But if there are no public comments, we can go right ahead with our agenda, which should be pretty short today. So we're going to start with the chair report, which is for me, but I don't really have much to report on today. So I'm going to kick it over to Dwan to give the director's report. So we'll save the 5 minutes for that. There's not really much to relate. Thanks, Dwan.
And I just want to echo, I think today is going to be a short meeting, probably less than an hour. And I'm going to defer the majority of my report until agenda item 4.2, when I give you an update on where we're at in the IOLTA EF application review process, and then how that intersects with kind of the additional audit extensions. And then my only other update is a staffing update. So Heidi Slater was previously the committee coordinator for this particular committee. She's no longer at the state bar, so I'm going to be taking over the committee coordinator position for the next 2 meetings until the next term. And then we always do kind of a little bit of a rotating chair. So you will most likely get a new committee coordinator, but you have me for two more meetings. And I'll turn it over to you, Jason. Back to you.
Thanks, Juan. So next is meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the meeting minutes. I would invite a motion and second for approval, or if there's any discussion or modification, please let us know.
I'll make the motion. Second.
Apologies, I didn't see that happen too quickly. Was it Judge Klein who made the motion and Angie who seconded?
I believe that's correct.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, I'll go ahead and take roll call vote. Gonzalez,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Milrod,
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Stalker,
Yes.
Culkin.
Yes,
All right, that's 7 yeses, 0 nos, motion passes.
wonderful. Now we're going to move on to committee business, and I believe first up on item 4.1 is Chris McConkey, who's here. I see him. He's going to talk to us about care court grants and the amounts for county public defender offices from the Budget Act of 2025. Chris, take it away.
Thank you. And can you hear me okay? Great.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one moment, please. You should be able to see the slides in a moment. So this is a relatively quick presentation, maybe just a few minutes to tee up a resolution. So we will be asking the committee to vote to approve the awards for 2025 for care court grants, and by extension, the amounts that county public defender offices and their functional equivalents would be receiving. And I'll explain in just a second why that the grant amounts determine the amounts the public defender offices get. But the resolution is going to be governing for both. So just as a quick refresher before I present the resolution, the CARE Act is a law that lives in the Welfare and Institutions Code, and it created a new court program starting in 2023. It had launched statewide by the end of 2024, but it phased in starting in the fall of 2023. And this new court program provides a civil proceeding where adults with qualifying, as in like the Welfare and Institutions Code kind of lists these out, qualifying serious mental health issues can access behavioral health care, medication, housing, and other community services. So like I said, it is now launched statewide as of December 1 of 2024. What the CARE Act provides is that these care courts, again, civil courts, will appoint qualified legal services projects, so the commission's current grantees, to represent the subjects of care court petitions, and the CARE Act calls those respondents. And in counties where no QLSP has agreed to represent respondents, the care courts appoint public defender offices. That's how the CARE Act kind of approaches this. The funding for this program is provided for by the Budget Act. So the next Budget Act will be the Budget Act of 2025. It's going to be Senate Bill 101 or 102. Senate Bill 101 passed the legislature on June 13th. It does provide for the funding and other funding parameters for these awards. It requires the commission to continue funding QLSPs to represent respondents. It's a competitive grant making process, and to fund public defender offices to represent respondents for the next state fiscal year. And the way that it does it is it says that any funding left over from the awards to QLSPs to represent respondents in any particular county goes to the county's public defender office. So it kind of tracks with the way care courts actually appoint the representation. If there's a QLSP, they get appointed. If not, it goes to the public defender office. The funding works similarly. The commission can also fund qualified support centers and quote other entities. That's actually the language the Budget Act uses, other entities, to provide legal training and technical assistance to implement the CARE Act. The amount of funding to do this work in the next state fiscal year in the budget bill, which again has passed the legislature but is awaiting the governor's signature. It's $15,750,000 for the representation of respondents. So that's awards to QLSPs or public defender offices, with any funds left over from the grants going to the public defenders. It sets aside a separate pot of $788,000 for the qualified support centers and other entities to deliver legal training and technical assistance. It does provide that if there's any funds left over from that pot that's for legal training and technical assistance, that actually rolls over into the pot for representation. So the public defenders and QLSPs can get a little bit more, which is what would be happening with the scoring team's award recommendations. I'll show you in a moment. And I wanted to flag two big changes from past Care Court awards. So starting with the next state fiscal year, the Budget Act of 2025 would, for the first time, require the commission to make 3-year awards to QLSPs instead of 1-year awards. So we did solicit 3-year proposals and also to enter into 3-year funding agreements with the public defender offices. So there'd be parity. SB 101 provides by its own terms the funding for the first of the 3 years. That's the next state fiscal year. And it would be the budget acts of 26 and 27 that would provide the funding for future fiscal years. So this 3-year award recommendation is going to be tied to the amount of funds that's available for year 1 and is contingent on there being available funds for years 2 and 3. And that was hyper clear in the RFP and in the grant application and its instructions and in all of State Bar staff's communications with the applicants. The other big change was the Budget Act of 2025 placed a restriction on how much the commission could lower a returning provider's share of its county's funding. So for returning QLSPs and returning public defender offices, we actually can't lower their proportional share of their county's funding to represent respondents by more than 25%. So that is new, and the award recommendations do take that into account. Just 2 more slides for you, and then I'll stop for questions, and then I have a resolution. So the State Bar received applications to represent respondents from 4 qualified legal services projects. All 4 of them are the current grantees for this year. So they are already representing respondents in Care Court. They are all returning providers of representation to respondents. We also received applications from 2 support centers and 2, quote, other entities to provide legal training and technical assistance. The scoring team applied the same cutoff score that the Care Court Grants Committee applied in the last 2 years. And that was if the applicant received at least 56 out of 80 points, which is 70% of the points available, they were recommended for funding. If they received less than 70% of the points available, they were not recommended for funding. Scoring generally reflected how projects would best support the CARE Act program and respondents. So the materials kind of get into what that criteria was, but there's a lot of focus on being able to administer the funds responsibly, safely, to represent adults that experience very serious mental health issues who are often homeless or at risk of homelessness in a way that's sensitive and effective, and just ability to efficaciously litigate and negotiate with county behavioral health agencies and other work that the CARE Act contemplates. So for the 8 proposals, all 4 of the QLSPs and the 2 support center applicants scored above 56 points and therefore are recommended for funding. The scores, the breakdown of scores, the funding amounts, excerpts from their application are all in the materials that were posted for today's meeting. The 2 other entity applicants scored under 56 points, so the scoring team has not recommended them for funding. I am just going to note the amounts that are in the final column would be their annual amounts for the QLSPs. That's the 3-year proposals. That's per the Budget Act of 2025's terms. But it would be subject, the funding for years 2 and 3 would be subject to the availability of funds in future budget acts. For the support centers, the Budget Act of 2025 actually only solicited 1-year proposals. So that's just going to be their award for the 1 year. I think my next slide is the resolution, but I did want to pause to see if there are any questions about the scoring team's recommendations. I didn't put this on the slide. This isn't the memo, but the scoring team had 2 state bar staff members and 2 commissioners. I can very generally speak as to like sort of the things the scoring team sort of talked about and did, but every scoring team member kind of got to their own opportunity to arrive at their own score, and the scores were averaged following a conversation about each applicant individually. I see one hand raised. Let's see, is that, yes, Judge Gutierrez, Wayne Gutierrez?
So for disability rates, education and defense are substantially lower than the other awardees. Was that the amount they requested?
That is the amount they requested. DREDF is being recommended for its full ask. Their reason for asking for so little is they would prefer to subsidize this work using interest on lawyers' trust account grant funds to avoid a spin down issue. So they want to do this work and they want to avoid having funds left over by asking for too much. And they think they can have the role they want to have with just this amount of care court dollars, and then the other grants they already have signed up for.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
I will just say, because it's similar, Immigrant Legal Resource Center is also being recommended for their full ask. That's why that's like such a very specific number. The Justice and Diversity, so I mentioned earlier, the Budget Act of 2025 makes it so that we would be unable to lower any of the returning providers' proportional share of their county's funding by more than 25%. So the scoring team actually paid a lot of attention to that restriction, that potential restriction, and kept the sort of funding splits between the 2 providers for San Francisco the same. So those 2 providers will like this year would get all the funding to provide representation in San Francisco with the same split between them. And there was a shift in the split between the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino and its county's public defender, where LASSB would be getting a little bit more than proportionally than it did last year, but it would be within that restriction. And LASSMC, the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, actually asked for a lower proportional share than what they got this last year. So they would be getting their full ask.
And I think Chris already said this, but I'll say it again in case it's not obvious. This is for the competitive portion of these grants. If there's a county that does not have a service provider or legal aid, that portion that's allocated for that county will go to the public defender's office.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about the award recommendations, or the applications or anything like that? I'm not trying to, I don't want to rush, but if there's not, I'm just going to leave the resolution up for a moment. The one thing I'll say about the resolution is just also a refresher from the delegation of authority that occurred in May, and this is also in the memo for today. The Budget Act of 2025, its bill has passed the legislature. It is awaiting signature. It provides that the commission must make these awards by July 1. This was true for last year too. It's a tight turnaround time, which is why the full commission delegated authority to this committee to go ahead and finalize the awards before the end of June. So they'd be done by July 1, but subject to the final terms of the Budget Act. We do not anticipate any changes to the budget bill that has passed the legislature between now and when the governor signs it with respect to the care court dollars. So the resolution does, though, in an abundance of caution, include the clause subject to the terms of the Budget Act of 2025. And then the further resolved is just acknowledging the possibility, although we do not anticipate this happening, that if for any reason at all, the final Budget Act provides for a different level of funding, whether it's through a trailer bill or otherwise, the award recommendations would be adjusted proportionally, and so that the awards could automatically be adjusted proportionally, and the grantees would have the opportunity to revise their budgets to reflect that, but we don't anticipate that happening as of today. So that concludes my presentation, Jason, if there were no other questions.
Thanks, Chris. If there are no other questions, I will go ahead and ask for someone to potentially make a motion to adopt the resolution or pose changes or alternatives.
I'll move adoption.
Thank you, Angie.
I'll second.
I didn't see who that was. Connor, okay. Let me do a roll call vote.
Great. All right, Gonzalez,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Milrod,
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Stalker,
Yes.
Alkin,
Yes.
and that's 7 yeses, 0 nos, motion passes.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Chris. All right, back to Dwan for 4.2.
Thank you. So this is my agenda item. I'm actually going to be presenting on behalf of Angela, who could not be here today. She's on vacation. So before we get to the PowerPoint, I wanted to provide you all with where we're at on our IOLTA and Equal Access Fund grant application process. So as you heard from the last GS committee meeting, we are kind of in the throes right now of reviewing IOLTA and EF application. This is our interest on lawyer trust account grants and our equal access funding grants. So grantees kind of apply. It's one application, but it's two different grants, but they share very similar kind of requirements. There's some differences at the budget revision, at the budget phase that we'll tell you about later in the year. But at the application and the eligibility phase, it's virtually identical requirements, and so we administer both of those grants at the same time. For this year, we received 120 applications. 6 of them are from new grantees, and 1 is an applicant that was previously funded by the Trust Fund Commission that was found ineligible for funding last year. You'll hear a little bit more about that grantee in a minute. And half of those 6 organizations that are new applicants are Immigration Legal Services. At the last GES committee, you all approved audit extension requests for 3 of those grantees. So just as a reminder, as part of the application process, applicants have to submit either a full audit of their financial statements or an audit review if their total corporate expenditures are below 500,000. There are 3 programs that preemptively asked for audit extensions, and you approved that at the last commission meeting. You will be hearing in this agenda item 4 more requests. But before we get there, I wanted to, because I know there was a couple emails that were sent related to eligibility review conferences. So these are conferences that are between applicants that the staff flag as need a little bit of a closer look at and before we determine eligibility. So we do ask for 1 or 2 volunteers from the GES committee. It used to be the EBR committee that used to do this, but now it's in the purview of this committee that will be conducting those eligibility review conferences with both the staff that reviewed that application. Our OGC is involved in the application at that ERC level, and then there is a senior staff member in our office, either myself or Joyce Sung, who's the other director of grants, that will be there to conduct that 1-hour eligibility review conferences. After the conference, you all meet for another half an hour to go over what you would like to recommend to this committee. So this meeting is going to be short because it's the audit extension. The next meeting that we have in late July will be a lengthier meeting, and it's a very important meeting because we will then go through the details of those eligibility review conferences and what you would like to send up to the commission in August to kind of make a recommendation of eligibility. And usually by this time, we know that with 120 applications, we're really down to just those 3 of whether we're going to find them eligible or not. Then the package will be presented to the commission, but we really need to do a very careful review now that we're at the 3 that we're a little bit unsure, and this is where your expertise, your questions, and your input will help determine that recommendation that then goes to the commission. So that's where we're in the process. Thank you so much. I know it's a very bad time of year to kind of ask for volunteers, so we really do appreciate for everybody that is volunteering to be part of our ERCs, and we have enough volunteers now, so thank you very much for responding to those emails. If there are no questions related to where we're at in the process or ERCs, then Crystal will help me share screen and go into our PowerPoint for today. Okay, great. I don't see any. So Crystal, thanks. Okay. Okay, you can advance, Crystal, to the next slide, please. Okay, so just as a reminder, as I mentioned earlier, the audits is part of the IOLTA and EF application review. The deadline to submit audits is May 1st, and then the staff, we have discretion to grant an extension through the application deadline. And then anything that's after the application deadline, then we have to elevate it to the Trust Fund Commission. And then there's a standard. If there's just showing of extraordinary circumstances, you can grant that extension. If there's no standard of extraordinary circumstances, you can still grant the extension, but you may want to put in some conditions around that extension approval. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here are the 4 that are requesting an extension. Wage and Justice Center and Public Law Center. They both submitted, as you'll see in your attachments, kind of supplementary information of why they're requesting it. We have summarized for you the reason for the delay. I do want to note that for Wage and Justice Center, their audit is now in, and Public Law Center, they're requesting until July 15th. And given kind of the circumstances and their executive leadership, the staff is recommending approval of both of those audit extension. For UFW and Yuba Sutter, it's a little bit of a different circumstance. United Farm Workers is a new grantee who right now, after our first sweep of our application, seems to be having what we call a primary purpose issue. Like they might not clear the fact that they're providing primary free civil legal services in California to indigent Californians, and that's one of like the baseline requirements in order to qualify as a legal aid program. So there's a little bit of a back and forth between them, and so we are hesitant right now to grant kind of the extension until we see the audit come in. So what we're proposing is there's already an eligibility review conference that's in the works that's being scheduled now. 2 of you will be involved in this eligibility review conference. We think that it maybe is more prudent to just couple all that in case when we get the audit, and hopefully we get that audit before we have the eligibility review conferences to see if there's any other issues that's related to the audit or internal controls or anything else that's related. But they are a program that needs to be, we need to have a serious conversation with them and vet through their audit first because they're newer and because there's this primary purpose issue. So we're proposing to not approve the extension request today until we have the ERC. Yuba Sutter is an organization that had been a longtime grantee of ours. Last year, they applied for funding and they were not found eligible because they could not submit their audit on time. So they have now reapplied reapplied for funding, and they still have not submitted their audit. And in the last audit that we reviewed from them, there were actually some pretty serious internal control deficiencies. And so for that reason, we want to also defer until the eligibility review conference happens to see whether we should approve that audit if it comes in. And again, hopefully, I mean, this one is very tricky for us because they are thinking they're not going to get it until July 22nd. We have to do the eligibility review conferences in the next couple weeks. So most likely, the scenario is that we're going to have the eligibility review conference and we will not have the audit. Hopefully, they can at least give us some draft audit so we can get a preview of some of the findings and some of the numbers. But this one is really tricky for us because the last audit that we have seen from theirs was kind of some serious deficiencies. And so it really puts us in a bind because even if we get it July 22nd, the staff will try definitely to review it on time, but I really don't know where this one's going to land. So I think we'll have to, our recommendation again, because we don't have it in hand, is to just defer to have that conversation with them. Hopefully they can have it finalized by the time we have the ERC. If not, then at least some draft. But then we could use the 2 commissioners that are going to be participating taking a really close look at this one. So that's why UFW and Yuba Sutter is a little bit of a different recommendation. So let me pause there to see if there's, because the next slide is the motion, but to see if I can answer any questions. I do have the staff on hand that are reviewing these applications. So if you have anything that you want to know specifically, we can elevate those staff members to answer if I can't answer the question.
Yeah, I have a question.
Of course.
The farm workers, they're gonna make this deadline. I assume they probably have a few other issues on their plate right now. Is that gonna be a problem with their deadline?
Judge Klein, what do you mean by a few other issues?
Farm workers, immigration, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's yeah. So, you know, but we have our deadline, and so yes, all these organizations, a lot of our organizations are really struggling now, just in general. But we do still need an audit in hand, especially for a new applicant, in order to confirm the numbers are correct and confirm eligibility. And again, like I said, you know, they've submitted a couple versions now of their application. At one point, they were below that 50% qualified expenditures
Mhm.
mark. I think they've come back now. They might be a little higher. It might not be the right number. So our staff is working. It's been like ping ponging a little bit back and forth. So we actually don't have even a qualified expenditures number to know whether they're going to make it above the cut or below. But regardless, yes, I do feel for a lot of our programs and our new applicants that are dealing with a lot of stuff that's happening. But in order to have a final kind of recommendation, we need to have that audit in hand.
Is this a statutory deadline or regulatory deadline? Do we have
The-
no
the
visibility if they're all trying
Yeah.
to state these people?
The requirement for an audit is a statutory requirement.
Yeah.
The schedule when the audit is a state bar rule. So the advice from council last year, when we had a couple programs that had audit issues, Yuba Sutter being one of them, is that we didn't really have flexibility on the audit rule. But the firm like drop dead deadline hasn't happened yet. The way our schedules of deadline is phrased is that the commission pretty much has to deny a request for an audit extension once we go to run allocation, and we haven't run allocation yet. So before we walk into that August 8th commission meeting, we would have already had to review application and make a recommendation to the commission to find a program eligible or not eligible, or else we cannot make our deadline of running the allocation and then releasing it on time. So that would say it would be the drop deadline, but of course, like you have to kind of back into it because our staff need a few days to review it. And for a new applicant, because the review is very, I would say we do a very close review because they're new applicants to make sure everything is ordered. We got to look at their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, that everything is like up to par. We need a little bit more of a lead time than that. I would say, you know, if it was an organization that's been a longstanding organization for ours, has never had an audit issue, their draft audits are reliable, we can kind of cut that date a little bit closer to the August 8th meeting. But I would say for a new organization that might have some serious primary purpose issue, it would be very difficult to review it. Say it's beyond, I would say July 15th. Maybe we could make it work, but it would be very, very a big hardship for us. So I don't know if that answers your question. That's a little bit a long-winded answer. And any other questions from the committee? Crystal, do you see any? I don't see any from my then maybe we can just go to the next slide.
Okay, yeah, I don't see any other
You
hands.
see any? Okay. Great. And this is the resolution here. And you'll see the first one is that the committee will recommend to the commission to grant the audit extension for Wage Justice Center and Public Law Center. And the second resolution is for the committee to defer making a recommendation on the request for United Farm Workers and Yuba Sutter.
Duan, I don't know if you feel like this is material, but I think the applicant is United Farm Workers Foundation, and technically United Farm Workers is a different.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or
Yeah, thank you for that.
They're a different entity that hasn't applied, but
Oh, okay, thank
UFW
you.
Foundation has. I don't know if you want to add the word
Thank you for
foundation.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Maybe we can add that, Crystal, just an abundance of thank you.
The foundation affiliated with the union?
I think they are affiliated, but I'm just not privy to the details of that relationship. But
Yeah.
I think they do different work and it's complementary missions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is why having the audit in hand will be really handy for us, because that's one of the issues for this organization is whether they're like counting just a portion of their work or their total corporate expenditures. So we don't have right now confidence in what they reported as their qualified expenditures number to us, so that we can get a handle on what their if they will meet primary purpose. So we do need the audit in hand to confirm that. Thank you, Chris. Are there any other questions? If not, oh, yes, Angie. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
All right, sorry. All right, I think I got lost somewhere in the timing. Am I correct that we're gonna have a eligibility review conference to see why they're not doing their audit, make sure we can resolve any of those issues? But that has to be done in order to approve or not approve their grant request for the coming year that will be approved at the full commission meeting in July.
So there's a couple issues. So for the two that we're recommending deferring, which is United Farm Workers Foundation and Yuba Sutter, it's not just they have issues that's in addition to like requesting a late audit that are like going to impact their overall eligibility as well. And so because those are serious kind of eligibility issues, we want to ask you to defer making a decision on granting that extension request until we do the eligibility review conference and dive deeper into those kind of substantive issues.
Right, okay, and so assume that we can resolve that, but it has to be in order for them to have their grant approved for the next coming year?
Yes, they still have to submit an audit on time. Assuming we can resolve those other kind of eligibility issues, they still need to submit an audit on time, and then our staff still needs to have time to confirm all the numbers and do the review. The tricky thing about Yuba Sutter is they are now saying that they cannot get into the audit until the end of July, which really puts us in a pickle because it's very close to the August 8th deadline. And these applications are extremely technical, especially for programs that have issues, that there's some back and forth. It's usually not just we can sit down and review it for a few hours and be done. That back and forth takes a little bit of time. So it's cutting it really close. I mean, we will do what we can. That's why we're going to take them through the process, have the eligibility review conference now, because we cannot wait until their audit comes through. If we wait until their audit comes through, we're not going to make the deadline. So we're doing what we can to ensure all the other pieces are there, if in fact the audit is the last thing that's remaining. I suspect it might not be for Yuba Sutter, unfortunately, but we want to give it a good go, because we feel like they are, and I would say this for both organizations, there's such a need now for legal services that we always want to provide and do what we can to try to work with the program to find them eligible, especially for Yuba Sutter, because they are a returning applicant, right?
So if this whole process with the deficits and the internal things that we're worried about doesn't get resolved, they won't get their money for next year?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, thanks.
Right, Dawn, I had a quick question, just for clarification. I know Public Law Center in the memo had a June 30th extension. I know that was modified in this presentation for July 15. I don't know if you want to make a note of that.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I did make a note of that. Thank you, Crystal. Can you go back to that slide? The PowerPoint is correct there, right, Crystal?
The PowerPoint is correct. I don't know if you wanted to modify the resolution just because it references the memo.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. This came through just, I think, literally yesterday. Public Law Center is now modifying their extension request to July 15th, I believe. And we, as staff, we can accommodate that. That's kind of the latest extension request you granted last year. So it's not in the memo, but maybe you can modify it to say Wage Justice Center and Public Law Center as reflected in the discussion today's meeting, today's GES meeting, or today's June 24th GES committee meeting. Would that be okay, Jason, to modify that?
For sure, any wordsmith edits.
Just so yeah, public request from Wage Justice Center and Public Law Center as reflected in the GES committee meeting in today's June 24th GES committee meeting. And then strike the list in the memo because the memo's out of date now.
Or
That works for me, if it works for Jason.
Well, I can't guarantee that the motion will be adopted and that's written,
Is
but
the phrasing clear enough for you, Jason?
yeah, it's
Okay.
clear enough for me, and we'll leave it to committee members to invite a motion as amended or to propose additional commentary or adjustment.
I move as amended.
I'll second that.
okay, allow and take roll call vote. Gonzalez,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes,
Milrod,
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Stalker,
Yes.
Falcon.
Yes.
That's 7 yeses, 0 nos, motion passes.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's all the committee business we have for today, unless there's any open things, Juan, Crystal, that we need to cover. I'm seeing Juan shake her head no. I'm looking at Crystal's head to see if she's shaking no, but I think that's it. And so without anything else, we'll adjourn for the day and give everyone some bonus time back. Thank you all.
Great, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.